So, as I said, today I'm going to talk about the Terf War. And basically, there's a bit of reading to do. I'll try, if you can interact, if you've got anything you want to add, it would be helpful. So it's not, boring me just reading to you. I'll try and break it up a little bit with some questions. And I've also got a small video, quick video to play as well. So that might help. So TERF is basically an acronym for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. Femmes. But sometimes they call themselves also I think it's Rad Femmes. But what they basically like to be known as is the gender critical movement. Oh, yeah, brain's not working. Has anybody heard of the trans exclusionary radical feminists?
No, I know I haven't.
So they like to be known as the gender critical movement, and it's been said that that's an euphemism akin to white supremacists calling themselves race realists. So the term TERF was originally used to distinguish between two types of radical feminists. One that rejects the assertion that trans women are women. So those we call radical feminists today support trans women, don't they? That's what we are. We are radical feminists. They also, so those that we call radical feminists that support trans women, there was a split in the movement, the radical feminist movement. And then what we saw was those that became TERFs, which is the trans exclusionary radical feminist, gender critical movement. So a TERF is someone who does not consider trans women to be real women or trans men to be real men, or basically non-binary people to exist at all. Can you hear me okay? I'm just going to put the volume up because I turned it down.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just going to pin myself to. Excuse me. Right, and so as I said, there was a split in the movement. They don't consider trans women to be real women. If I go too fast, please slow me down because I have a tendency to do that. TERFs claim that trans women are really men who are ultimately oppressors of women. They believe that trans women are a threat to cisgender women's safety, which is based on basically cherry-picked cases of horrific cases by a small number of trans people. Can someone tell me what a cisgender woman is?
Can you repeat that again? Natalie, please.
Magda?
Cis women are women who are identified with the how to say it, with their organs.
Yes, relate to a person whose gender identity corresponds to the sex registered at birth. It's the same thing, isn't it? Thank you, Magda. So I think with regards to LGBTQ, I think we, as individuals, not as so much as a movement, even though the movement is individuals. I think, well, I'll speak for myself, looking into it at a deeper level, I think that do we know enough what God wants us to know for the end of the world and for the Sunday law, or do we need to do our deeper studies ourselves so we know just as much of what's important with regards to LGBTQ? I think when you look into it, that there's things that we don't know, things I didn't know. Are they important? On the grail standard, on the big scale of things, maybe not so much, but when you're interacting with LGBTQ, I think it is important to know more about it, and especially trans individuals, and also the battles and the wars that are going on with lesbian individuals and also trans. There's so much going on out there. I think we should know a bit more and do our own studies. So above all else, they don't allow trans people to have self-definition or autonomy over their gender expression, the TERFs. So when can we first trade TERFs? I know Wikipedia goes back to, which I don't like using, goes back to 2008, but I trace them back to, well, they are back in the 70s, but I traced it back to our reform line at the beginning of 1989, when they started influencing Conservatives. But as I said, we can trace it back to 1970s. It came apparent that they needed a term that separated radical feminists and those that supported trans women, and those that, as I mentioned, didn't support trans women. So you can trace it way back, but we can. My theme here is to know a bit more about TERFs, who they are, and also how they influence Conservatives and Republicans with anti-trans legislation. So TERFs attach themselves to radical feminists even today, even though they disagree on many things. And it's basically an attempt to deny trans women's basic access to health, restroom facilities, and basically anywhere you consider a woman's space. So TERF's misinformation about trans individuals has and is very damaging. They believe that transgender women, or men, but we're talking about women here, is due to a mental health disorder. So TERFs believe that transgenderism is to do with a mental health disorder. We know it's true that transgender individuals are having mental health issues because of society. And we know now because of political behaviour towards trans individuals, especially trans women, trans youth, and trans women of colour. So many trans individuals suffer with depression, they suffer with suicidal ideation and body dysmorphia. A survey in 2022, it was called the Terf Project, a suicide prevention group focused on LGBTQ youth. And they found that 86% of trans or non-binary youth reported negative effects on their mental health stemming from political debate and trans issues. And nearly half had seriously considered suicide in the past year alone. Any questions? Because when someone's reading it, you can miss things and not grasp what I'm saying. Or any comments? Go back to the, yeah?
When you were going over reasons why TERFs are against transgender men and women, you listed out, please could you repeat what you said, their reasons for being against trans identity?
I think I'll go back. I think the main issue is they believe that I think it's about believing that trans women are not real women, and they believe that they're men oppressing. Let me see what I've put. Yeah, they believe that when it's the men oppressing women. TERFs claim that trans women are really men who ultimately oppress women. They believe that trans women are a threat to cisgender women's safety, and they use that through. We have seen some horrific behavior from trans individuals, but like anything, you can't say just due to that it's not right. So they use cherry-picked cases, and they use that against trans individuals too. Did I leave anything else out? Anyone? So basically, they don't believe trans women are women, they believe they're men. So they're not in support of transgender at all.
Is that in part, I think one of the reasons is because they feel that a man who transitions doesn't have the lived experience of a woman, and so the belief is that they don't have the same oppression that a woman has had, so they don't get to call themselves women. I think what you mentioned was a good point, especially in light of what's recently happened in America, where I don't know if it was a trans girl or boy who went into a school, and there was a school shooting.
Yeah.
And a lot of debate has been around, you see that trans person went and killed students in a school.
Yeah.
But the retort to that is emphasizing that a person is not representative of the group, the marginalized group that they're a part of.
Yeah.
And people who have issues against trans people will use that, as you're saying, as reasons why trans identity shouldn't exist.
Yeah, very good point, exactly. If anybody else has got anything to add, because it's nice to add stuff, because we've all studied it, hopefully.
I think, do you think there's a fear there as well, Natalie? Because I think I was looking at, they didn't like them coming into the restrooms and all that stuff where women are. Do you think there's a fear there as well? A general fear?
You think what you're saying? Do you think men or
but for trans men,
or women
going into I don't know, the restrooms where women go to? There's, when I read it, it sounds like to me that there was a general fear there as well.
The TERFs, the trans exclusion feminist women, you're saying that they've got some fear. I think they use that as an excuse. I can't speak for them, obviously, but we have seen that with the bathroom bills, haven't we? And I'm sure, people that have used that as an excuse as well. I know there's famous people like the one who did something Potter. What's that film called? She's a TERF as well. There's people out there who've used that excuse about should we go into bathrooms and things. So yeah, maybe.
Why have there been stories about trans going into women's bathrooms and doing something?
I think many years ago, before we started talking about it, I think there has been some cases, as I said, that they use against trans individuals, like Curtis said, but you can't cherry pick. You can't just use one-off cases like that to say that it's wrong for individuals to go to a bathroom or a woman's space when they're actually women themselves, trans women themselves. You can't use it that because somebody's been abused or, I don't know, raped by a transgender person. You can't use that as an excuse to discriminate against the whole group.
And if they are a woman, I mean, if they feel like a woman, why would they want to rape a woman? Oh, sorry, they're trans men. Yeah.
Trans women are women, and those trans women that
they have the genitalia of a man, isn't it?
But I think the point is just, yeah, they've gone on to rape, but the point is it's not because they're trans. It's just we've got good priests. I shouldn't be comparing, but we've got good priests and bad priests or whatever. We've got good trans individuals that will accept the gospel, and we've got trans individuals that won't. So we can't use that as a reason to discriminate against the whole group. that do bad things. I mean, priests in this movement do bad things. But at the moment, we're not throwing them out of the movement, are we all?
No, I was just wondering if they feel like a woman, why would they want to go out with them? I mean, oh, sorry.
I know what you mean. You've just got individuals, bad individuals that do bad things, isn't it?
suppose so.
Does that answer your question?
A little
Sandra?
bit. I think I need to know more about trans people.
Yeah, we all do. Okay, so with regards to transgenderism being due to a mental health disorder, which we know is a lie, we know that any mental health issue or disorder a trans person suffers from is not the cause of someone being transgender, but actually a symptom of abuse, discrimination, and harassment. We should know that transgenderism is no longer listed in the DSM-5, which basically just means the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders of the American Psychiatric Association, as a mental disorder or illness. It's actually barbaric to think that it was ever in the DSM-5 that transgender individuals were, it was a mental disorder. I think that's quite horrendous. So I mentioned before that TERFs have and are working with Conservatives to push their anti-trans agenda. I'll speak a bit more about that in a minute. But we also know that trans individuals are 4 times likely to become victims of crime, violence compared to cisgender peers. So I'll actually speak about it now, how TERFs have an influence over Conservatives or Republicans. So in 1979, I said I could lead this back to, I think it was 79, yeah, TERFs in the 70s. There was a woman called Janice Raymond. Reach. And she was a TERF, and she was a professor at the University of Massachusetts. And she wrote what was called a defining work on the subject of being transgender. Her book was called Transsexual Empire. The making of the she-male. Basically, she's saying that transsexualism should be morally mandated out of existence, mainly by restricting access to transition care. And we know that's a political position that the past Trump administration used, and also what's getting carried out now by the right-wing Republicans. She wrote another paper in, I'm bringing this up because we know how far back they go, the TERF. Another paper was published by the government that funded Health Centre for Healthcare Technology. And after this paper was published, which was in 1989, the Reagan administration cut off Medicare in 1989 and private health insurance for trans-related care. So we see the Reagan administration cut off care, Medicare. And private health insurance. For trans individuals. That was in 1989, so we can trace these TERFs back to the beginning of our reform line. In the present day, we know people like Representative Marjorie Taylor. We know her. She goes by the initials MTG. She's an American politician, businesswoman, and a far-right conspiracy theorist. You should know, she's a blonde-haired lady. She's been the US representative for Georgia since 2021, and she's a big Trump fan, a big supporter of him. And she's established herself as a TERF and has promised to pass many bills which would discriminate against trans individuals. She recently questioned whether hormone therapy and medications for mental illness were tied to the latest shooter attack, despite there being no information that the user was using either hormone therapy or meds for mental illness. So like Curtis mentioned there, I think that's the one he's talking about. Marjorie Taylor was saying it was due to mental illness and hormone therapy. Any questions so far or comments? Slow me down if I'm going too fast. I'm not going to go into a study of this. I'm sure you all know about it. Could someone, or does anyone know what the Equality Act is about?
It was a bill, legislation that was put into Congress a few years ago. The idea behind it was to stop discrimination against people based on their orientation, their gender identity in different places, like where they work, access to housing, education, accommodation, etc.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, it was first brought up years back, but formally introduced, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk about it recently. I know Nancy Pelosi has mentioned it in her talk, and it was to stop discrimination. So the Equality Act is a bill, like Curtis said, in the United States Congress that is made into law. If made into law, would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the legislation, the Equality Act, seeks to protect LGBTQ from discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. What was the other one? Sex? So I just mentioned Marjorie Taylor. She speaks vehemently against the legislation of the Equality Act, and so do many right-wing Republicans, obviously, because it would protect LGBTQ from discrimination in regards to their sexual orientation and their gender identity.
What are they saying about it, Natalie?
Sorry?
What are they saying about it? What are they coming against, and how are they going to overcome it? Or are they planning to do anything about it?
What is he saying about it? Who?
Yeah, you just said that there's something, a right-wing something, are against it. So are they planning to do anything about it, or overcome the act?
You mean the Democrats? Are they planning to do anything, or the right wing?
No, the right, yeah.
Yeah, so they're actually, it'll answer your question in a minute. The Equality Act, which was passed by the Democratic-controlled House last year, would have prohibited, as I said, discrimination against LGBTQ Americans. However, it doesn't currently have, Debs, enough votes to become law. So if it was passed by the House, but not enough votes to be put into law. Does that answer your question? So they're stopping it from being put into law because there's not enough votes for it. But the Democrats have been trying to get the Equality Act going for a long time. Does that answer your question, Debs?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So the Equality Act would be quite amazing for LGBTQ with regards to helping them, but it's not happening, is it? I want to go on to why we're seeing now right-wing Republicans restricting access to gender-affirming treatment. So gender-affirming treatments have been targeted by Republicans and lawmakers in dozens of states, places like Tennessee, Mississippi, Utah, and even though major medical associations, including the American Medical Association, the Psychological Association, and American Academy of Pediatricians, they deemed those treatments medically necessary for care. They're still being restricted. So does anyone know, what would gender affirming treatment include? Anyone got any ideas? It's good that we know what's getting taken away for these poor individuals, the youth and trans.
Is that
women.
for them to transition to a woman, or if a man? Is that what you're talking about? Like a
So,
man wants to
yeah,
become a woman?
transition to a woman, or to
Yeah.
actually to be a trans man, the other way. So what kind of treatment is being withheld? That's the restriction. Anyone think of anything? If you were a trans individual, what care would you need to transition or to help?
When someone does go for treatment, there's different things like hormone therapy to affirm that outer shell experience, and sometimes there is physical surgery like
what did you say then? To affirm what? Or confirm?
hormone therapy that can be used to suppress physical characteristics
Yes,
of
okay.
their body, the outer shell. Sometimes there's physical therapy, so like a woman transitioning, a trans man might surgically remove their breasts. It differs from individual to individual, dependent on how they want to transition.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis.
What about counselling? Wouldn't they need counselling as well as they're going through it?
I wouldn't know. I would think they would need counselling due to the harassment and not getting the care that they need. Does that help, Debs?
Yes.
But like Curtis said, hormone therapies that can delay puberty or promote the development of certain characteristics such as facial hair or breasts. They also include surgical procedures to reduce the Adam's apple, if need to be, and procedures that alter the chest tissue, genitalia, as Curtis mentioned, which is also known as top surgery and bottom surgery. So in addition to banning the treatments outright, state legislatures have moved to make doctors and parents liable for administrating and approving them, and limit the use of public funds to pay for those treatments. So this is things that are going on, have been going on. In Arkansas, it was the first state to issue a ban on hormone treatment and puberty blockers or surgery for trans youth. The measure that also barred doctors from referring patients for treatments. Also in Florida, we should know that the parental right in education law, which took effect in 2022, makes it illegal for teachers to discuss gender and sexuality with students in certain grades, and criminalise instruction that isn't age appropriate under the law. And teachers must notify parents if they believe their child is transgender, and parents have the ability to sue schools or school districts that violate the restrictions. Some quite strong laws going in place as we speak. Any comments? As I mentioned in my last study, the Project Blitz, I think playbook, what was it? I mentioned about Republicans that have introduced to state legislatures around 300 bills. The more they introduce, the more probably can be accepted. Some have been passed, as we know, that prevent students from participating in sports, for instance, and censure to talk about LGBTQ people and their issues. We know one's just gone on the last few days, I think. I think the World Sport of Athletics have banned trans women that have higher testosterone of, say, 2.5. And I think last week in the UK, there was some banning going on with regards to sports with trans women also. Any comments?
I can't. There was an article I read a couple days ago regarding the Biden administration. I don't want to take it out of context, but essentially, because I can't remember exactly what it went through, but from what I briefly remember and understood was that the Biden administration had proposed a change in something a position that they had held initially, essentially allowing schools to block transgender athletes from, competing in sports that match their gender identity. So a trans woman participating in women's swimming or whatever it may be. So I know a lot of the time we point to Republicans, but this is something that's coming from the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And so I think it would be important. I put an asterisk there because there might be a lot more context to it that I'm leaving out. And also we look to America I know that's the place where a lot of this happens, but we see the same thing happening here in the UK with Scotland, and even now under the Prime Minister and his questions about trans identity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Curtis. And we know Terf's had a lot to do with this as well, especially as well in the UK and Scotland. So as I've mentioned again, in Project Blitz study that I did, I also mentioned religious liberty bills that threaten trans civil rights. I think there's probably around 19 states that don't have laws that shield people from discrimination based on gender identity. I mentioned last time some are strengthening liberty protections, which may allow employers and businesses, medical providers to discriminate against trans people. So there is, I know Curtis just mentioned that it's not just the right wing. I agree. But we do see this religious liberty coming into play with the right wing. So far we have seen that legal precedent seems to support religious liberty. For example, in 2021, a federal appellate court ruled that a professor could not be forced to use trans students' pronouns on the basis of doing so would have conflicted with his religious beliefs. I think there was also, if we remember, the court case about a Christian business owner, was it, and refused to make a wedding cake. I think that's, I can't remember. So we do know that, and I think they won on religious liberty grounds. So we do see this in the background as well. Any comment? So another issue that Republicans are trying to put forth is to make it impossible for trans people to update their ID cards and their documents. Over the past years, a number of states have introduced bills that make it hard for people to change their gender info on state identification cards, driver's license, birth certificates. Why is that a big problem for trans youthful people, trans people? Any ideas, anyone? They haven't got the right ID.
Well, they're not going to be recognised for who they really want to be, are they?
Yeah. Anyone else? Thanks, Deb.
And if someone does transition and go through those physical changes, it doesn't reflect what they look like. So it could be barriers to when it's needed to be identified and when someone needs to be identified.
Yeah, definitely. And it stands to harm trans and non-binary people by putting them at risk of increased harassment as well and other threats, as their identification that accurately, like you said, Curtis, reflects the person's gender is necessary, and not just how they look, but it's necessary for employment, for travel, for medical care, basically moving freely through public life without consequences, isn't it? Unfortunately, though, in 2022, Oklahoma became the first state to sign a bill against non-binary gender markers. The law forbids the symbols on birth certificates that don't identify with the male or female. Now, lawmakers in the state want to define women as those identified as women from birth. So it's all about biology, isn't it? It's all going back to, what were you born as? A croaky voice, sorry. Any questions?
Sorry, did you say there was, excuse me,
Is that?
did you say that there was a law in the state in America that said you have to identify with what sex you're born with?
Yes.
Is this just recent or has it always been like that?
In 2022, it was in Oklahoma, became the first state to sign the bill against non-binary gender markers.
Okay.
Thanks, Adri. The laws are, some of these laws are currently in effect in Tennessee, Kansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, as I said, Montana, and such bills have been introduced to. So you've got stores that are in effect, places that have these laws in effect, and you've got some that are being introduced. So they're also being introduced to Arizona, Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, Texas, and Virginia. But some of them have failed, ones that have been introduced. Places like Texas used to allow a letter from your doctor to change your ID, but now I think you have to get a gender marker on your driver's license. To get a gender marker on your driver's license, birth certificate, you need now in Texas a court order to do that. In Tennessee, the state's Vital Records Act says that gender is issued on birth certificate. Gender that is issued on birth certificates cannot be changed as a result of surgery. So it's pretty bad. And we know that this is the rhetoric of whoever's going to run in 2024, on the right side, the presidential election, the likes of Trump and DeSantis. So I'll just give a summary of where we've been so far before I change onto something else. So we've talked about TERFs, what they believe, and the difference between them and the true radical feminists, and how they came about due to not supporting transgender women. So we saw a split in the radical feminist movement, but they're still attached to the radical feminists because they have an agenda. They're against trans and they're helping with the right wing with their anti-trans legislation. I spoke about the influence of TERFs on conservatives. I mentioned Janice Raymond from 1979, the Transsexual Empire and the Making of the She-Male label. And I also mentioned about the Reagan administration and how they read her paper in 1989. They began to reform by cutting off transgender affairs and Medicare and private health insurance for trans-related care. And I mentioned finally the Equality Act and how that would support LGBTQ if passed into law last year. So I want to bring your attention now to a gentleman who's a representative in South Dakota called, right here, Fred Deutsch. Now, he's been helping religious right-wing networks by trying to get anti-trans bills passed. He was a Republican member of South Dakota House of Representatives, representing District 4 till 2022. And he comes from Florence in Watertown in South Dakota. He previously served 9 years on the Watertown Board of Education. And we can first trace him running for office in 2012. An important year for us, priests. He ran for office, but he lost. But he was re-elected again to the State House in 2014. And this as another important year for the priest. So he was elected here in 2014. Way before this, it was way before the Roe versus Wade was getting overturned. In 2015, and he was already a representative, he was wanting to ban abortion. And he wanted to ban abortion at 20 weeks. And, you know, back then in 2015, that was quite radical. And he was the former president of an anti-abortion group in South Dakota called the Right to Life. In 2016, he drew national attention for the bathroom bill. Does anyone want to tell me what the bathroom bill is with regards to transgenderism?
I've just been reading it, Natalie. It just says it aimed to make it illegal for public school students to use a bathroom, shower room, or locker room for a sex other than their sex at birth.
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, so the bathroom bills aim to take it to illegal. It's illegal for public school students to use bathrooms, shower rooms, as Debbie said, locker rooms for sex other than the sex of birth. The bill was vetoed by Republican Governor Dennis Dugard, and in 2018, he was re-elected. He came first in a 5-way race. In 2019, he sent out emails to right-wing representatives and anti-trans activists, doctors, lawyers, with a text of a bill he planned to introduce. We know these emails were leaked this year. So in 2019, we see leaked emails. Over the past 3 years, he has coached other state representatives to bring into law an updated version of his original bill because it didn't go through. One in Alabama was signed into law. For example, in 2022, it was the country's second ban on gender-affirming care and the first to criminalize doctors who provided it. First was actually in Arkansas, which was passed in 2021. Today, 6 states have totally banned gender-affirming medication and surgical care for minors. However, in Alabama, a federal judge agreed to block parts of this new law. So what I'm going to do, just break it up a bit. I'm going to, any questions on that? I'm just going to play a little quick video. No questions? See if I can find, I'm just going to turn the volume off. Can you see the screen?
Yes,
Can you see the video?
yes.
So those who are watching on video later, you can go to motherjones.com and watch this. You can listen to it here. So I'm just going to play this. It doesn't take long. It does go a little bit fast, so be attentive and I'll just give you a summary afterwards. Let me know if you can't hear it.
We can't, it's not very clear at all. Can't hear anything.
Can't hear anything?
No.
See if I can.
I don't know if others can hear it, but I can't.
Anybody else hear it?
No.
I've got my volume on high. I can just give you a summary. Do you want me to play it again and see if it works?
Yes, okay.
Can you hear
Can't hear
No.
it too well, Natalie.
Yeah,
But I think there's a specific setting that you need to choose to share the computer audio itself, because it's
Yeah.
trying to pick up the audio that's coming out of the laptop as opposed to.
Yeah.
But I can't remember where that setting is.
I think Tom knows all that, doesn't he? Tom used to do all that.
Do I have to shut something off on my computer to make the
No, it's within Zoom. There's a specific setting that you need to choose to share the internal audio of the computer.
I'll tell you what I can do. I can just play it on my phone and you can hear the volume from that. All right.
Good idea. Yeah.
Just let me bring it back to the beginning. So you can watch it on the video on the screen, but you will hear it from my phone. Is that okay? It might be a little bit delayed or something, but it's the best I can do. Okay.
Recently got my hands on a trove of leaked emails for an exclusive investigation that revealed how the countrywide assault on transgender healthcare has been orchestrated in part by an under-the-radar network of conservative activists, fringe doctors, and religious rights lawyers. As I speak, 7 states have already banned gender-affirming medical care for trans kids. And these attacks on transgender healthcare are just one part of an even bigger wave of over 400 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced by state lawmakers this year alone. To understand how we got here, you have to start back in South Dakota. Republican State Representative Brett Deutsch.
2020, I brought a similar bill, HB 1057. Each of you can go into your computers and listen to the testimony.
Back in 2019, Deutsch sent an email to 18 anti-trans doctors, lawyers, and activists with the text of a bill he planned to introduce that would make it a felony for doctors to give transgender kids under 16 gender-affirming medical care. Among them is the Alliance Defending Freedom.
Freedom cannot survive in a culture that's abandoned truth and rejected reality. This is the battle for our generation.
A religious right legal behemoth that's defended state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people in Europe.
One powerful Christian legal organization has been planning a strategy to overturn Roe v. Wade. Their plan worked.
Also on the emails is the innocent-sounding American College of Pediatricians.
I began to notice that they were drifting away from science-based policies. But the tipping point for me and my co-founding colleagues came when the AAP endorsed same-sex adoption.
In the emails, you can see exactly how these conservative groups and anti-trans activists worked with state lawmakers to push their legislation into states beyond South Dakota. At least 18 states this year are considering legislation that closely resembles Deutsch's original bill. As the race for 2024 heats up, so do the attacks on people who are just trying to live their full lives.
Day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation In all 50 states, go very quickly.
Representative Deutsch declined to comment for my story. An ADF spokesperson responded by saying that lawmakers often seek advice from experts in law, policy, medicine, and other fields as they craft legislation. In other words, for them, this is routine. But if you want to know about who is influencing the spread of anti-trans bills, or take a peek inside the leaked emails yourself, you can read my full report at Jones.
Hear any of that?
Yeah, I remember. I saw they've added what's his name, Trump's speech in. I remember listening to that Trump's speech and what he said. I on the separate video that he did. I was aware of that one.
Any questions? I'll give you a summary because it did go fast. It was quite, and if I slow it down, it would have sounded strange. So I'll just give a little summary of the video. So basically, Deutsch sent out, in 2019, he sent out emails to right-wing representatives, basically anti-trans activists, doctors and lawyers, with a text of a bill he planned to introduce that would make it a felony for doctors to give transgender children under 16 gender-affirming medical care. These organisations were at the forefront of the anti-trans movement. In the bill draft that was sent, replies were sent back to Deutsch to make the bill even more restrictive if possible, raising the age threshold to 18. Members affiliated with the ADF, which we saw in the video, Alliance Defending Freedom, a conservative right-wing powerhouse, warned that other religious right groups might not support the bill if he stated giving away rights to 16 and 17-year-olds right out from the outset. So the ADF, which I mentioned, the Alliance Defending Freedom, they were also involved in Roe v. Wade, overturning Roe v. Wade. So Deutsch agreed to change the bill. Deutsch's legislation, which was called the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, was killed though in the Senate after doctors showed up at the South Dakota State House to argue they should not be sent to prison following the medical consensus at the time. So their effort to defend what they call the gender confused vulnerable children failed back in 2019 due to these doctors going into the courthouse. However, Deutsch's bill proved influential, especially in the recent surge of anti-LGBTQ lawmaking. A lot of language now closely resembles the text of his legislation in the Vulnerable Child Protection Act. The leaked emails revealed how the proposal helped proponents of the national movement to restrict gender-affirming care and basically established a playbook for the now common attacks. And in South Dakota, Deutsch finally won the long battle this February in 2023 when Gov. Christy Noyer, I think her name is, signed an updated version of his bill. The new law strips licenses from doctors who provide minors with gender-affirming care and require healthcare providers to gradually cut off puberty blockers and hormones for any kids they are already treating. So that provision is expected to force some in South Dakota teens to medically transition by the end of 2023. Just quite tragic. And this is trying to go on in other states. Any comments so far? No comments. So I'll just give you, I know I've been summarising as I go along because it's hard to take in when someone's reading to you. So we've come to the end of the presentation. What I began to talk about was TERFs and who they are and why they came about and how they influenced conservatives from 1989 to now. I mentioned how the Equality Act would have helped LGBTQ if brought into law, but it hadn't passed the House. It only passed the House, sorry, but not enough votes to be passed into law. I also mentioned Janice Raymond and her book and how her other paper, influenced the Reagan administration in 1989, and I mentioned how they started to stop the care for cut off Medicare and private health for trans individuals back in 1989. And then finally, as I've just spoken about, Fred Deutsch, who has for a long time worked with organisations that were at the forefront of anti-trans movement. So I'd like to say thanks for your contribution. If you haven't got any questions or has got any questions.
I think
Yeah.
Curtis has got his hand up. Yeah.
I guess it's a question for us. If we were to Google or look into the differences between gender and sex, which is what affects we take into consideration when dealing with the topic of transgender men and women, at least on what you find on the internet is that gender is a social construct. That's how it's phrased, at least. And I think for a lot of the things raised about gender, we would agree that the way specific genders typically behave is socialized behavior, that women present themselves in one way and men present themselves in another. Women dress one way, men dress another. Women do certain behaviors and men do others. So it's socialized to a great deal. So at the beginning, I had asked about some of the accusations, if that's the right word, or problems that TERFs have with transgenderism. And you mentioned, like safety in personal spaces, lived experiences. There's one that I think we need to answer for ourselves, which is what exactly identity means in terms of gender identity, because it's easy, distinguishing between the two, but there's implications behind that when we do, because one of those implications is that we're affirming that there are gendered behaviors, which at least at where we are now, we would say they aren't. It's what instead there's behaviors that society has attached to genders. So I find personally this topic really complicated, because there's a lot of stuff that I don't think we as humans understand about the internal spiritual nature of our beings. And so I guess my statement is along the lines of being careful how we relate to a lot of these topics on both sides, of this debate, if you want to call it that, because there's just so much we don't understand, especially around gender and what makes a woman and what makes a man. Yeah.
I think I didn't have time to look into it, but you could look into inclusive feminists. I think they're more about, biology, about why do we have to, why is it all about biology? I think there's some good stuff in there I need to look into, but you're right, it is a complicated subject, but we do need to be really on form and know everything we can as priests, 144,000, we don't want to not have the knowledge. And, I think we need to, as with every presentation, especially of the leaders, we need to go away and look deeply and meditate on those subjects. That is our job function, to do that. We are responsible to do that. And it should be present. It should be the first thing in our lives to do. I'm not preaching here, but it should come before everything else, because that's what we've been called to do. Thank you, Curtis, for your comments, and everybody else. I'm going to stop the video. I can see it's showing.